Hello and welcome to episode 173 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Shane here in sunny Denver, and with me on the line from beautiful springtime Chicago, it's the one and only Stanislav.
It's me, Stanislav.
We're doing this one again?
Well, it's funny because Stan was just reading the notes because he was not intending to be here. Stanislav, you had a little body malfunction, my friend, under the weather.
Yeah, I had a little bit of food poisoning. Only happens once every 10 years or so. Last time, it was a taco burrito king.
Because you only eat once every 10 years. That's one thing people don't know about you.
I go into very long hibernation periods.
Slow metabolism.
It's called intermittent fasting, Dave.
Yeah, intermittent.
Very intermittent.
No, but Stanislav, it's good to see you. I'm glad you're with us. It would not have been the same if it was just the two of us. Me and Dave doing an episode.
The people love it.
People love it. People also love our godfather, Dave Harbarger.
You guys ever have a podcast that has a reasonable number of listeners and sometimes you broadcast it live and then you realize that you swore a lot in the pre-roll that was live on Twitch?
I mean, only one person was here. And then it gets deleted.
Is it my mom?
It gets deleted. I don't know. It's Steve's train. I love when you just like there's people's online nicks. Just, it's Steve's train.
Well, I hope Steve's train. I hope I did not offend you. If you want to hear me accidentally swear sometimes, go in and tune into Twitch. Keep an eye on Twitch. Dive Down Shane, twitch.tv /Dive Down Shane.
The Dive Down _Shane.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we've been getting back live. We had like a brief hiatus when we were like our schedule was weird and then we were remote, but we are back on this. So come join us. Typically Sunday, sometimes Monday, but you do that little follow thing and then like it notifies you when we go live. And I don't just go live randomly. It's once a week. So don't worry.
Shane, tell us what's on this week's show. You and Dave did most of the prep work while I was in ill health.
So we are going to be talking about more decks and especially more meta-breaking, meta-influencing new cards, things from Streets of New Capenna that are making some bigger waves than we thought and pretty much most people thought across all the formats we cover, even some we don't cover. So it's not just sacking things to Mob Nixilis any longer. We're going to be taking a look across Modern, across Pioneer, even across Pio, Capital, and Near Explorer to do maybe the whole dang episode, checking out these decks. And, we if we have some extra time, we have some community submitted decks that they wanted us to check out and talk about. I suspect, my friends, that we don't get to those in our patented dive down fashion where we have an entire third section that just gets thrown out.
Well, you know that I did go in a fugue state and write about one particular card. I woke up 5,000 words later.
Yeah, it's a good thing we asked all of our patrons for advice on which decks to cover so that we can just ignore their recommendations.
Yeah, it's always the best thing. It's just like, hey, y'all, we don't really know what we're going to cover this week. Oh, yes, we do. We're going to ignore everything you submitted.
And if you'd like to reach out to us and be ignored, you can find us at patreon.com/thedivedown, where as little as $1 a month can get you access to our definitively discreet Discord server where we ignore what you say.
So yeah, we're going to shred. We're going to sleeve, believe, heave, maybe, and then look through a couple recent showcase events. We don't just have the Modern Showcase Challenge. I'm spoiling my own breakdown. We're going to have the Pioneer Showcase Challenge as well. But first, some housekeeping. Stanislav.
Shout out to the newest patrons to join the Dive Down Nation. We got Drakon57 and Friedrich H. Maybe pronounced H.
Thank you both.
H, thanks for joining, y'all. We also have a new review from GB Laws. Thanks for the feedback. We appreciate it.
I also like the headline. Just said, great, GR8, like a good license plate. I just gave the Patreon plug, so we can skip that this week, everybody. But you know where to find us if you want to be ignored. But if
Dave, I want to do Mana Traders. Okay. You want to do Mana Traders.
Go ahead.
Shane does Mana Traders. ManaTraders.com. We've used this, I think I'm at 17 months is my thing.
Are you
kidding? It has to be longer than that. It has to be longer.
Shane, we started using Mana Traders in November or maybe even October of 2018. I believe we all signed up for it. The podcast started in December of 2018. So, I mean,
I had to have been using Mana Traders. But anyway, Mana Traders, the best place to rent your Magic Online cards. Why is it great? 1, extremely fast, extremely reliable, extremely efficient. 2, free tournament events every month rotating formats, many of the ones we cover, including Modern and Pioneer. If you are a Mana Traders member, you get a boatload of more free prizes. You don't have to pay anything to enter, and the tournaments work really well. You don't even have to use MTG Melee or anything like that. You don't have to make any account anywhere else. You just go to the tournament practice room, and it just works. It's just you find the person, you play them, and then it automatically sort of reports to Mana Traders somehow. So that works really well. I like that quite a bit. And they're good people to work with. They've been reliable for us. So if you want to get 15% off your first 2 months, use sign-up code TheDiveDown2022, and you'll help us out, give us a little kickback, and we appreciate it.
So guys, I haven't been keeping an eye on tournament results because I was stuck in bed, going just between the bed and the couch while sleeping through television shows. Tell me, what happened on MTGO this weekend?
Well, people played Magic the Gathering.
Cool.
As usual.
All right, let's take a break, and when we return...
Yeah, so this week on MitGo, as I call it, me and my buddy Magic Online, we will start with the Modern Showcase Challenge. As a reminder, 3 times a season, I don't know what a season is, I think it's 4 months, a format challenge is replaced by a showcase challenge. Each of these events requires 40 QPs to enter. You can't just throw cash at it. And the top 8 finishers from each event earn an invitation token to enter the format's showcase qualifier. So, yeah, if you remember, it sounds a little bit backwards. It sounds like the qualifier should qualify you for the challenge, but it's cool. So we got our top 32 breakdown from, of course, unofficial news correspondent Bamsing, and it looks something like this. 5 Living End. 5 Is It Murktide? 5 4-color elementals. And then we immediately take a big step down to a couple copies of Boros Burn, a couple copies of 4-color Blink, and then a bunch of one-ofs, including some things like Azorius Urza Affinity, the 4-color Tameshi combo deck, even Selesnya Heliod, Dredge, Eldrazi Tron. So yeah, we have a lot of Living End here. Do you gentlemen have any other thoughts on this slightly unusual modern metagame?
I don't think it's that unusual, to be honest. I mean, we've had cycles recently where Living End suddenly shot up to the top for a given week, and maybe people just thought it was, appropriate to give it a shot this week. I will say, I saw a little bit of chatter from people on Twitter over the week that people were starting to cheat on Graveyard Hate a little bit. People are starting to say, in Murktide, for example, I saw people saying they were 5-0ing with the list, and they're like, I shaved out relics. I don't want to play them, really. I'm going to try some other stuff. And maybe that's what made some other group of people think that it was a good time to kind of shove all in with Living End. It does look like it worked out for at least one person, but we'll kind of see where it goes from there. Stan, what do you think about it?
I mean, I think you're kind of right in terms of people maybe shaving on Graveyard Hate, and it did the Dredge thing that Dredge used to do, where just we'll have a good weekend every once in a while. And I think if more 4-color decks are becoming Elementals builds, that also helps open the door for Living End to maybe punish opponents who are playing fewer Teferi Time Revelers, for instance.
Yeah, and more creatures, so they get the Wrath part of Living End helps a lot too, right?
Yeah.
Even more.
Yeah, I've been hearing some stuff like that 4-color Elementals is sort of quietly becoming one of, if not the most popular deck in the format. And so, yeah, Living End's a good call there, of course. I'm a little bit surprised that Is It Murktide continues to maintain its toehold in the most popular selected deck by most people, because I still haven't seen, at least in the community tournament end of things, any evidence that points towards Is It Murktide being a particularly powerful choice. As always, it gives you agency, and as always, it gives you some good cards to play with, but it always seems like it's hovering right around 50% or even less in the NRGs and other tournaments where we get data from MTG Melee.
I feel like it's ever present in MTGO top 8s, though.
I mean, you throw enough darts at the wall, one's gonna hit the bullseye now and then.
I do think that the move to Murktide suddenly becoming a sub 50% deck recently is recent too. It's not, for as long as the deck has been around, it's mostly been low 50s in aggregate events, things like that. And then suddenly it went all the way down. You know what I mean? Where, suddenly all of a sudden we're getting these tournaments where it's like Murktide only did 42% at, the SCG Con last week and those kind of things. I think it might be temporary, it might be matchup based, but I don't think there's any time soon that deck's going to stop being a staple of the format. And in fact, we're going to talk about ways that Murktide is evolving and adapting soon and treading. But
it's shredding, bro. So let's get into this top 8. We have Casa with Living End, number 1. Looks like Living End to me. Second place is Azorius.
So real quick on the Living End list, a lot of subtleties in this one, including a main deck one, which you don't always see a main deck subtlety, but you definitely see them in the sideboard. That's a card that people have been starting to talk about again as being good again. Guess what? I think it's still good.
Yeah. I mean,
it is free.
And it really helps solve that Teferi problem too, because it does tag Planeswalkers.
Yes.
Right on. Second place, we have Charlie. I know that guy. They are on Azorius Urza Affinity, which this does not seem like it has any particular combos going on, right? This is just a high-value Urza deck, right? Just drawing lots of cards, making a lot of mana, casting a lot of spells.
And then crushing with Nettlecist.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really close to some of the 8 cast lists that I messed around with when Kamigawa came out originally. And, they are not playing the Springleaf Drum from Kamigawa, which I forget the name of suddenly. But they are playing some interesting cards that I haven't seen too much, namely having Teferi in here, main deck, along with Urza, I think is a newer thing, at least over the last couple of weeks. And Ingenious Smith as well is something that I don't think people have seen in these lists quite as much lately. And I think this is one of the highest results for this version of what's essentially Affinity at this point in time. And it looks pretty powerful to me.
Yes, why not play quite possibly one of the top 5 Planeswalkers in the format that only costs 3 mana in your colors? I feel like this deck probably takes a little bit of time to spool up. And then if you can stop the Cascade decks from going off early, especially Footfalls, I think you're probably in a good place.
Yeah, although your creatures do get bigger than Footfalls, at least in this case. So
up next, third place, Comic Sans with 4-color Tameshi combo. So, yeah, I mean, the combo is real. I know that we've had even notable players like Gabe Nassif taking this deck to tournaments, and it's not just for the meme value. So if you want to hear us talk about this combo, we talked about it in somewhat recent episodes. We described it, but more or less it can go off with Lotus Bloom and do a lot of good stuff.
It's real. New big mana combo. The new Adnaz. I'm saying it now.
Oh, wow.
Ooh, why not? Fourth place, Is It Murktide? Snurkus McWax is on Is It Murktide? It looks like Is It Murktide to me. Dave, you're noticing all the small changes this week. Do you see anything in this particular list?
I don't, but Stan is also super deep on Murktide, so...
One of Seasoned Pyromancer on the side is kind of cool. I noticed they're moving to Magus of the Moon instead of Blood Moon. I think that's been happening over the last few weeks, probably because of
to dodge Boseiju.
Yeah, and Boseiju. Good call.
Fifth place, we have Living End by RVNG. This was the 8-0 finisher, the only 8-0 finisher, I believe, based on Bamsing's report.
We got the one of Valakut Awakening, so that if you draw your Living Ends, you don't just have to hope you also draw Grief, because there are no Griefs.
Oh, that's interesting.
No Griefs, just subtleties. And this is also playing Windcaller Aven, so it has an extra cycler.
Interesting, no Grief.
For a little extra endgame, I suppose.
All right. Sixth place, we have Tezzy with kind of regular old affinity, or kind of, the frog, the might-based affinity.
Yeah, this is the other 8-cast. The other kind of 8-cast. Yeah, exactly. The one with the mites.
Or the mites and knights, and Sojourner's Companion, of course.
They have a companion, but it's not that kind of companion, if you know what I'm saying. So Sojourner's Companion actually, and Mirror Enforcer, I did like playing this kind of deck when I was testing the Colossal Dreadnought version and all that stuff. I always was amazed with how fast you can play like multiple 4/4s with this particular build on the really good draws.
Like how fast?
I mean, I sent you guys a screenshot at the time when I was playing that deck where I think I had like 2 Frog Mites and 2 4/4s on turn 2 in one game.
That seems pretty good.
It can be really cracked. The problem is this type of deck, you don't really have like any interaction at all. So you're really just kind of all in on your plan and you can't really do much about your opponents.
So in 7th place, we have a third copy of Living End. 3 of our 5 pilots made the top 8. Ruliboran, this one has Grief, but it looks like Living End to me. It has a 3 subtlety in the side. So yeah, stocking up a little bit more on that card perhaps than normal. 8th place, Boros Burn, Kacharo. So one thing I liked about this top 8 is there's not a lot of like big names that I notice here. Not a lot of like the MTGO grinders that we talk a lot about when we do these breakdowns. But I'm sure all these people play a ton. But I think congratulations to a lot of these folks for making the top 8 in this big challenge.
Just goes to show even Dave can one day top 8 a showcase challenge.
Doubtful, but thanks.
When we see Halo Bender, we'll know that we know that guy.
If you see Halo Bender, give him a shout out. Say, hey, what's up?
If you say Halo Bender, don't be offended if I don't talk back because my chat is closed, friends.
Oh, yeah, I forgot Dave never opens the chat. He's probably had dozens of people say, aren't you Dave from the Dive Down?
And now they all think I'm a jerk.
All right, any thoughts on this top 8 besides, dang, it's a lot of Living End? The silence is deafening.
It's a lot of combo decks. I mean, I guess the biggest thing to me about this is just I saw one of the pilots of the Affinity, I think Charlie, on Twitter was like, this deck is busted. My blue-white Affinity deck is busted. I'm like, could be. Like, I kind of want to go back and give that deck another shot now with this particular build because, adding Teferi and Esper Sentinel and Ingenious Smith, I think, is an interesting new dimension on the deck. I do think that the Affinity shell in general is powerful enough to be something in Modern, so it's good to see a couple of players getting results out of it. Not sure why now, but...
All right, I did notice some cool decks ink for the Modern Challenge. I saw Kiara Works in 18th place, had Felidar combo featuring Yorion, and we might have time to talk more about this later, but I thought might as well do it now. This is the latest iteration of Felidar combo. It features the new card, Vivian on the Hunt. And so essentially, Vivian on the Hunt is what, 6 mana? Something like that?
It is 6 mana, 4 colorless green.
So mildly expensive, but with 4 mana, a Planebound Accomplice, and a Vivian in hand, you can get Vivian in play because a Planebound costs 2 and a red. Her activated ability costs red. It lets you shove a Planeswalker from your hand, sneak attack a Planeswalker from your hand into the battlefield, and then you can do the following in this deck. You activate the Planebound Accomplice, put Vivian into play, then you +2, you sacrifice the Planebound Accomplice, get Felidar Guardian, which flickers Vivian. You then re-plus your Vivian, sacking the Felidar Guardian. You get Karmic Guide, which then allows you to recur your Felidar Guardian back into play, which will then allows you to re-flicker the Vivian. So then you resack the Felidar Guardian, you get Kiki-Jiki the Mirror Breaker, you copy your Karmic Guide, which then allows you to get Felidar Guardian back, and then you flicker your Kiki-Jiki, and you do the Kiki-Jiki things. You get infinite hasty copies of Felidar Guardian with Kiki, and then you kill your opponent, which of course relies on no disruption for your opponent. But what this deck does interestingly, I think, is that it has a lot of backup plans and just sort of raw value. It has the Saheeli combo also built into it. It has Omnath, which does Omnath things, especially with cards like Wrenn and 6. It has Teferi 3 to help try to protect you against interaction on turn 4 as well. It has a lot of ways to ramp your mana. I think what's interesting about decks like these too is that they're eschewing mana dorks more often, and they're just saying, hey, look, cards like Abundant Growth, cards like Utopia Sprawl are just interaction-proof ways for me to ramp my mana. And I think that's been an interesting thing in Modern, I think we've seen over the past year or so, is this adoption of these land enchantments more often than I think we've seen previously.
Yeah. One note, Abundant Growth does not ramp you. It just lets you draw. It fixes your mana. It lets you draw a card, right? So it's not ramp, just to be clear. If it was, these decks would be so much better. But these decks are already good.
To that point, though, Abundant Growth being a cantrip makes it also a much better top deck in these 80 card decks than a mana dork is. So it kind of has like better value both in the early game and when you inevitably go late, because these decks like take forever to close.
Yeah. However, I would note this deck doesn't have Abundant Growth in it, although most of the Yorion 4-color decks do.
Still a good conversation to have from time to time.
Yeah, right now. Bring it up now. I do think, these things just play with my heart so much because there have been times in my life when I've really wanted to Kiki-Jiki some stuff, right? And it keeps coming back. It's sort of like the payoff card that will never die. I really admire that. I don't know if this is the time that it's going to work or not, but this is another wave where we got another pod-esque card where everybody is very interested in it. You know, I had medium success a couple times a couple years ago with Vanifar as a card that is similar to Vivian on the Hunt in decks like this. And you know what? Vivian is a lot harder to interact with than Vanifar is, although you do need the plain-bound accomplice version of the whole thing in order to make it happen. There is certainly a lot more room for good cards in this deck than there has been in previous versions of this style of thing, both because you run 80 cards because of your payoffs and also just because your combo actually takes less cards. So you get to run things like Solitude. You get to do some other stuff as well, like Shane mentioned. I don't know if this is the time that it's going to work, but maybe.
I know that friend of the show, Spider Space, also had good luck with a very similar, if not identical deck. So it's a thing. I think the thing that really turns me off is that's an 80-card Yorion deck, which is just not my favorite thing ever to try to pilot for whatever reason. But, you know, could be. It's just, this is the kind of thing where it's like, this gets to play, I think, largely better cards than Devoted Druid decks because you still have to play Devoted Druid. And in like a world of interaction that we have around us, Devoted Druid, I think, is just running up a hill, pushing a boulder up a hill, if you will. So trying to tap a boulder up a hill slowly once a turn.
I will say, I basically have this deck except for Vivian's and Plainbound Accomplices, and it certainly makes me wonder if I should just get these cards because they're not super expensive.
Don't do it.
Yeah, how's Plainbound doing? Oh, not expensive.
Yeah.
That went up, though.
Yeah, it was a 10-cent card.
Stonks.
Stan's like, come on, don't even consider it. He's probably right.
Dave.
All right, I want to briefly mention 30th place deck, Beaumat Courier. That's a really good Magic Online name, by the way. 30th place, Dimir Control / Reanimator. It's kind of a mix between various cards you would expect in a Dimir Control deck, like Fatal Push and Thoughtseize and Counterspell and Archmage's Charm and Snapcaster Mage. But then it adds in this Reanimator package of, you know, Quartet of Archon of Cruelty, the Persist, I think a Singleton Ardmark Grave, but also has 4 Tainted Indulgence. And this was a card that Stan mentioned in our episode, but what I think we all kind of whiffed on, just the part that Tainted Indulgence is just a good looting spell. Like its fail case is that, or perhaps its primary use in a lot of these decks is honestly, I'm looting. Like I'm paying 2 mana at instant speed and I can keep up interaction, or if you don't do anything, then I loot something into the graveyard. You've probably seen this card if you're playing on Arena in like Esper, what's that annoying Greasefang card? And I think it's seeing use in Reanimator shells and things like that. So this is a pretty cool little build. I just wanted to show it for highlighting a new use of Tainted Indulgence.
Here's the thing that's sort of surprising to me, I guess, is that how much worse is this deck if it run? Well, let me look at the mana. So these Reanimator decks were already trying to run Faithful Mending before, right? And like I know Faithful Mending is draw 2, discard 2, and this is draw 2, discard 1, right? Is it that much better? I guess it's that much better that it makes it enough that people want to try it. Because I have seen a ton of people just trying Tainted Indulgence as discard outlets. But I'm kind of like, Faithful Mending was here the whole time. And you get to flashback it if you want to.
Yeah, that's the thing. The flashback and the life gain is often big game, or like just enough to stabilize you against more aggressive decks.
I mean, bear in mind that a couple of the top decks in the format are running Blood Moons. So I think that becomes a problem if you're going 3 colors just in the first place. I also think that this shell in particular is the most likely to actually draw 2 cards off of Tainted Indulgence. Because if you think about like your fetches being 0, your Thoughtseize being 1, Archon being 8, like all you need is a 2 mana spell and then like any other spell to turn it on. And I feel like this deck, like by running things like Memory Deluge, Shark Typhoon, and like your one of Murderous Cut, it's playing some of these spells to help activate Tainted Indulgence some number of times, even if like most of the time you're just using it to get Archon of Cruelty, so you're not like totally reliant on your one of Unmarked Grave as well.
Yeah, but also keep in mind, the 5 mana value thing is not a May, and so sometimes you're going to want to discard Archon of Cruelty and you're not going to be able to here, because you're just going to be able to draw, you're just going to have to draw 2 off of Tainted Indulgence as well.
But you have control over what you're putting into your graveyard along the way as well. So you can like, but you can guide yourself.
Can't still be in trouble. I don't know. I'm just curious. I think it's strange. And yeah, I think that we did miss that part in talking about it, that it's just a good discard spell, good, looting style spell. But yeah, weird. Also weird that this deck is sort of conspicuously missing one particular card that we'll be spending a lot of time on later.
All right, let's head into the Pioneer Showcase Challenge. Same deal, 40 QPs to enter, all that kind of good stuff. And I did the metagame, so thanks to Shane, our news correspondent. We've got 6 Winota in the top 32, 5 Izzet Phoenix, 3 Azorius Control, 3 Izzet Control, 3 Makdos, man, every time, 3 Makdos Rakdos Mid, 3 Mono Red, 2 Mono Green Walkers, and then a bunch of one-ofs, including things like Banned Spirits, Lotus Field, Fires, Transmogrify, Rakdos Sack, Niftalite, Fires, Enchantments, and Mono Blue Spirits.
Yeah. Interesting breakdown. I mean, Winota was the same in the big event that we looked at last week, like far and away the biggest one in the metagame. This time it's closer because of Izzet Phoenix, but yeah.
Are we going to talk about Winota the way we talk about Living End?
In
Let's
which
do it.
sense?
Winota's bad. Yeah. It's bad for the game, probably. Probably bad for the format.
I think Winota is much worse than Living End, personally. I don't mind playing against Living End in Modern. Winota sometimes is like, come on, like...
Yeah.
Winota's just one of those annoying decks that requires you to keep up certain types of interaction, and Pioneer is lacking in them more than Modern is. So you're kind of you'll lose to the rest of the deck a lot more easily than you will kind of a lot of creature combo decks, because you're just sort of saying, I have to keep holding up this 1 or 2 mana spell, my Noxious Grasp that I happen to get, or my Ray of Enfeeblement, and they can just be like, I don't really care. Like, I'm just going to hit you with all these 2-power creatures, the 2 tokens off my
Esca's Chariot.
Yeah, Chariot is, man, what a bonker. I never played versus that in Standard, and what a card.
Yeah.
What a Chariot.
I had that experience today where I was up against Winota and I was just holding like Reckless Rages and Redcap melees to kill it, and then they just play like a Tovolar's Huntmaster, and I'm just
that
what
is
am I
always
supposed to do here?
Yeah.
That's always what wins. It's just like, I got to 6 mana, here's my Huntmaster.
That is a huge difference between what Winota was maybe a year or two ago, like when we first started playing in Pioneer when Winota was here, and now is that, the payoff for Winota used to be, what was that card called? The like
Angrath's Marauders?
Card? Yeah, or 8 mana card that gave everything double strike, and now the payoff is just, hi, I'm going to cast a 6-drop that makes 2 2/2s as well. Like that's a lot. It's a lot better of a plan B than the deck used to have.
Yeah, in Explorer, they played a card that I've never seen before. It was just like some 6-drop with hexproof, and like it gave all your other creatures hexproof, and it was just like, hey, I'm amazing. You're never going to beat me on Rakdos Mid. All right, so let's head into the top 8. We've got okay. Oh,
this one was won by Pioneer's hottest deck. Am I right?
The hottest deck, Fink 64 on Mono Blue Spirits. I didn't see anything particularly weird here. It looked like a Mono Blue Spirits list, very finely tuned.
There's
one. Whoa. There's several interesting things here. Stan?
Yeah.
You go.
I mean, the sideboard, 3 copies of the best card in Magic, El Dive Down.
When was the last time we saw that?
Oh man, this is the best thing ever. First place, 3 copies of the Dive Down of the Dive Down in the sideboard. It's legendary. You can only have one on the battlefield at a time.
Exactly.
Rumor has it that Fink's Dive Downs were signed by the hosts of certain Magic the Gathering podcast.
A lot of people don't know that we made NFTs of Dive Downs a while ago and distributed them to the original patrons.
Yeah, even though we hold no rights to the art.
No.
We put our own faces on it. It just says Dive Down.
It's remix.
Yeah, it's a remix culture. People have said that, aren't there strictly better Dive Downs at this point, or not really?
I actually think there is not, because the one that people have pointed to a couple of times, it's like you see a guard approach. It does tap a creature or give your creature hexproof. The thing that's good about Dive Down still is that it buffs the toughness.
Yeah.
Have you seen this new card from New Capenna that's...
Slip out the back?
Yeah.
So good.
Which I think is another interesting card in this space, where it gives you a 1/1 counter and then phases out the creature.
I think that card is reasonable too. I actually expected to see that, or I'm surprised to see Dive Down on the side here, because the phasing out is a nice way to get around other spells that Dive Down can't help you with, like a Wrath, for example, if you want to save one creature that has Curious Obsession on it or something like that. But yeah.
I like the 4 witness protection on the sideboard. I don't know if I haven't really noticed that before. This is just one of those blue removal enchantments that actually seems pretty darn good. It just makes the enchanted creature lose all abilities, and it becomes just a 1/1 legitimate business person, green and white citizen card. So that's a good way to take the text and stats off of any card for a really efficient price.
Yeah, this deck really struggles. I've been playing this a good amount in Explorer. I played a little bit in Pioneer. Generally, this deck struggles with creature interaction, right? Brazen Borrower is the only thing you really have that can get a troublesome large creature out of the way. So when I saw that someone put witness protection, that this person put witness protection in their sideboard, it made some sense to me as something that kind of helps bolster problematic creature matchups. The problem is that it doesn't help you with Winota. Like, it doesn't help you. It doesn't have instant speed, so you have to sort of weather an attack and then use witness protection. But I think it's useful in a lot of cases still. So it seems like a cool thing to try.
Right on. Speaking of Winota, that's what Bullseye was on in second place. Looked like Winota to me. Third place, we have Cherry X-Man on Mono Green Walkers. One thing I liked about this is it took me back in time a little bit to when you could play Pelucranos World Eater in your deck and enjoy it. If you have not played since like Theros or Con Standard, Pelucranos is a 2/green Hydra, and it has XX green Monstrosity X, and I will forgive you if you don't remember what Monstrosity does. It essentially level 2s it, and when it level 2s, it deals X damage divided as you choose among creatures your opponents control. And each of those deals their damage back to Pelucranos, but you're frequently using it as a giant way to like pump up your Pelucranos or clear the battlefield of a number of smaller creatures. So it does good work there if you have tons of mana available to you. Third place, Jesse Samick on Is It Phoenix?
Yep. And this is the first occurrence, I think, of a deck that's running Ledger Shredder that we've seen in either one of these events. The creature suite in this is 4 Arclight Phoenix, 4 Ledger Shredder. We will talk a lot more about Ledger Shredder, of course, in a little bit. But yeah, here it is. Discard outlet that gets big. That's doing all the things that Ledger Shredder does. Seems like a good fit for the card.
Here's another deck running a card that I have never seen before, and it's from like Ravnica. It's Tablet of the Guilds. It's a 2-mana artifact that you get to choose 2 colors when it ETBs, and whenever you cast a spell, if it's at least one of the chosen colors, you gain 1 life for each of the chosen colors it's in. So yes, it's a giant dragon's claw for more than just red.
Huh. I've seen the art for this card for sure. It's an interesting piece of tech.
Oh yeah, it's like the guild thing you've seen before, like on some playmats and stuff like that.
Yeah, I wonder if it's because this deck kind of just struggles against the mono red burn strategy in particular.
I don't really know. Like it does kind of stabilize your life total as you're sort of peeling through your deck, maybe looking through like for Arclight Phoenix to finish things off, or I don't know. I ran it in the Is It Prowess version of this deck that I'll probably be talking about a little bit later, and I never had any opportunity to bring it in, but I was like, I know exactly when I want to, and I hope it's really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool that it procs off both colors, so it's just
Very
like
cool.
You say Is It, and anything you cast is going to like gain you life, and because this is such a Turbo Xerox deck too, I feel like it's going to gain you like 10 life easily.
Yeah. Do you want expressive iteration to be even better? Have it gain you 2 life.
Wait, it gain
Each color.
Wow.
That you chose.
Yeah,
Golly.
it's only your spells is what we should just point out. So it's not your opponent's spells, which is why you have to name Is It every time, but at least you're in charge of your destiny when you do it then.
All right, 5th place, Belovo, known MTGO grinder on Azorius Control. 6th place, we have AFX. Yes, Richard D. James himself on Is It Control. This one has a Hullbreaker Horror, a Singleton Hullbreaker Horror. I don't believe we've seen that before. And interestingly, there are no main deck Niv Mizzets.
So horror is usually in the sideboard, and I think you play it main because it can help the Winota matchup, since it blocks like their Huntmasters for starters, and then turns all of your cheap 1-mana spells into tempo plays. The hard part is just kind of like making sure you're stable enough to get to that position, but Niv Mizzet, like it kind of demands a lot to really be a worthwhile investment in the first place, because like you have to get to 6 mana or 7 mana if you want to activate it immediately. It does die kind of quickly, but like, you know, maybe you're 2-for-1ing your opponent if they're spending an instant or sorcery to kill it.
Right on.
Also, a split of Collected Defiance and Days Undoing. 1 Days Undoing, 2 Collective Defiance in this particular build.
6th place, also known Pioneer Grinder Claudio on 5-color Niv-to-Light, doing Claudio things. You know, they just love this deck. So
yeah, it's 5-color Claudio at this point.
yeah. And then 8th place, we have Max09 on Azorius Control. So we had 7 different decks in our top 8. I think it looks like a pretty good cross section about what the meta is about right now. There's a few decks that I would put up on this list that, you know, didn't make the top 8 that are, you know, big pieces of the game. But yeah, it's a good indication of what's going on.
We tend to gloss over these Azorius control decks from time to time, but I want to ask both of you, how much of a beating is playing against these 4 of Wandering Emperor decks? Like,
yeah, the
card crushes.
It's really good in Pioneer. Like it's very high power level. It does that thing that control decks I think frequently want, which is just like, I'm not just drawing cards. I mean, even though that's usually really great, and it's not just like bouncing permanents by minusing. It does a lot of stabilizing the board aggressively, and then turning the corner and coming back really fast, which I think is, you know, what you noted, Stan, when we were talking about this card. And I think Pioneer's the power level where it can really do that a lot more often, even than Modern.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I hate playing against that card.
No, it's really hard to deal with.
Yeah,
it's one reason I've been liking Strangle in my red base decks, because it can handle the Wandering Emperor pretty easily. So just because of the loyalty it has when it ETBs.
Dave, have you been playing Strangle too?
Yeah, not for the same. I actually haven't run into Emperor too much, which is why I didn't say anything right there. But yes,
I think in general, though, I'm curious. Like, do you guys think has Strangle earned a slot? Like, is 1 mana sorcery speed 3 to creature walker? Has it been worth it?
I think it's better in red black than it is in blue red. Personally, as far as like a guaranteed a slot to get in the deck, just because blue has counter spells that you can lean back on for some of the problematic planeswalker type things, but it really depends on how you're building your deck, I think. But I found Strangle to be totally fine in Explorer. I think it's totally fine in
Pioneer.
Pioneer as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it quite a bit. It's not one of those cards where I'm still like sold on it in my main deck all the time, but I have liked it. I think it's a 2 of in the Is It Tempo. Excuse me, not Is It Tempo. The Is It Prowess deck I've been testing out in Pioneer, and I think it does good work there. Just to, you know, you always want something to clear the board, and there are a lot of 3 toughness creatures that you want to be able to take care of pretty quickly, or like it's every now and then it's just like, oh, this Planeswalker's on 3. I don't have to attack into it. I don't have to like shock it and then swing into it. I can just use the Strangle and then go to face with my Prowess creature, and that 2 to 3 damage is just a huge swing. So
yeah, I do often find that when I have Strangle, though, I'm like, how can I cash this in for value as fast as possible? I don't find myself holding it a lot. And, you know, different situations are different ways to play your removal, but I'm always kind of like, let me make sure I kill something with Strangle while I still can before I get stuck with it in my hand.
All right, I found a few Cool Decks Inc. Pioneer Edition, 9th place right after our top 8. Frederico, Imato, Medio, on Enigmatic Incarnation Fires, featuring Yorion. I played against a deck similar to this back at the SCG Dallas Fort Worth, and what this deck does is lean really hard on Enigmatic Incarnation to cheat things into play. And if you forget what this card is, I do not find that surprising. It's a 2 green-black enchantment, and it says at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another enchantment. If you do, search your library for a creature card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed enchantment's mana value. Put that card onto the battlefield and then shuffle. So it recycles your enchantments into creatures, if you so choose, of 1 mana value or higher, so allows you to tutor them up. And you play a number of cheap value enchantments, like some omens, like some Chain to the Rocks, elemental creatures, and then once you get to your Enigmatic Incarnation, you can ride that up the chain to strong threats like Kenrith the Returned King or Tosamir, Friend to Wolves, Yarok the Desecrated, and Cavalier of Dawn. And so one of the fun lines that I've seen played against me was like turn 4, play your fires, then you play the enigmatic incarnation, then you immediately at your end step sack the fires to your incarnation to get a 5-drop, and then you're able to continue using that enigmatic incarnation on later turns with other enchantments that you put into play. So it's definitely a go over the top style deck that, you know, like most fires decks would be. And I think this deck definitely looks fun for the people who are winning with it. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, Mana Symbol was pretty into this deck at different points in time as well, or different versions of this deck, and it's cool to see it doing well.
And then 11th place, this is a really small, pretty cool deck sync. A Sri Smael on Rakdos midrange, splashing blue for 3 Nicol Bolas, the Ravager main, and 1 Scarab God in the side. Why not? If you can. Nicol Bolas is a very good mid-range card. And if you don't want to go full Grixis, might as well just splash for it, I suppose. So yeah, there's 2 big events with a lot of people trying to win some cash. And I think we get a good idea of what the competitive metagame is looking, at least like right now, in these 2 formats. So, you know, of course, we'll keep our eye on what's going on and keep testing ourselves. But I think that there's going to be a lot changing even in the next few weeks as people keep testing some new cards, some new builds, discover new sources of power in Modern, Pioneer, Explorer, and we're going to talk about those after we take this quick break and come back into the dive down. So stay with us. So Stanislav, I imagine since you've been under the weather, you've just been wallowing in your own filth.
Literally. I mean, look at me.
You always look good. You always look good. But I imagine you have not been thinking about partaking of the wonderful products from Barrister Man.
No.
Unfortunately, it hasn't been top of your mind.
Hard to clean yourself when you're just covered in a cold compress all the time.
I shaved my cheeks. Do my cheeks look all right?
Just the cheeks?
Just the cheeks, yep.
You have to shave like your whole cheek though.
I shave, all the way from basically my lower eyelid down to my jawline sometimes, and I still have a lot of hair. So we're working through it.
I had one of those weekends that one has in Colorado where it's just like, I'm gonna wake up, have a little breakfast, we're gonna go do a hike, and then come back, and then because it's spring, it's like, oh, gotta get the yard ready for the summer, gotta redo some mulch, gotta get rid of some weeds. And then, like, you take that shower after all that, and you're like, oh, man, I'm going to take care of my body and do the shower, do the shave, enjoy the Barrister and Man. We had some Mother's Day time with my mother-in-law who lives here as well. Got myself looking good for the lunch and museum trip. And I just love rotating through all the different Barrister and Man products that I have. And what's cool is, like, you can mix and match a lot. Like, I have, of course, the Seville beard oil, but I have like the smoked orange aftershave balm. I have the Waves balm. I have like 3 different shaving soaps, and a lot of them just smell good together in different ways. Like I love the Passiflora plus smoked orange combo is a good one. I like to bust that one out now and then. The Double Waves is a classic combo. So that's one of the things I really like about the sort of fragrance family that Will's created over at Barrister and Man is that they're all good and they're all complementary in different ways, and they have they have characteristics that go between them, and then they're also completely unique because they're novel creations. And that's one of the things I'm looking forward to, even getting some new stuff on the way, because that's just going to add to my fragrance library, make some new scent of the days. So if you want to get your library card to this fragrance library, get your ticket to smelling good, feeling good, having some cool stuff in your medicine cabinet underneath the sink. I don't know where you keep that stuff, but you can go over to Barrister and Man, MANN, use coupon code THEDIVEDOWN 2022. You get you 15% off your first order. I know we've seen some glamour shots of people getting their first big Barrister and Man orders. I know Stalwart Jason just got a dope looking new order that made me jealous. And if you want to be, part of the Barrister and Man family, we appreciate it. Will over at Barrister and Man appreciates that as well. So thanks a bunch.
All right, like we said earlier, for this part of the show, we're going to take a look through all of our formats and look at some additional new developments, new decks caused by the launch of Streets of New Capenna. We just talked about some Cool Decks Inc. associated with the two showcase challenges that we looked at. I think really this is just kind of another Cool Decks Inc., a longer Cool Decks Inc. section, because there's actually been a whole bunch of stuff that continued to develop over the last week that maybe we didn't see in week one of this new formats. So we're going to talk about them, talk about new cards, notable tweaks. We might grade some of them if we're feeling into it. We're going to organize by format, except we need to start with one thing that blew everybody's mind, that made a bigger splash than we all thought, and made me want to ask you two one question.
Yeah.
And that question is, do you even shred, bros?
like that kind of shred?
Yeah, it's like that scene in The Firm where they send Holly Hunter down to the Bahamas and she shreds all the stuff. Yeah, remember? Remember that?
I keep thinking of like Tilda Swinton and Michael Clayton. She's got to take care of a lot of documents.
Oh, that's another good lawyer movie. Anybody got any other good lawyer movies they like?
The Devil's Advocate.
Less good.
Maybe
but,
the first rated R movie I ever saw.
That's hilarious if that's true. Maybe. But it's Shredder time. That's right. We can't talk about what happened in Magic this week without discussing the absolute furor, the frothing furor that happened towards the end of the first week of May around the card Ledger Shredder.
Where were you two when you personally found out that Ledger Shredder was just the hottest thing in town?
A $9 card?
Well, I was mostly upset that I had just tried to buy some the day before for my LGS and they were sold out. And then, that happened.
Mm-hmm.
I was working and thankfully paying attention to Discord because I think Mickey S pointed me to a store that still had some in stock and they took my money, but I don't know if I'm getting these cards yet. So we'll find out. I mean, it's like one of those stores where it's like, how good is this inventory management system? Like, did they just take my money and eventually they'll show up? I mean, that's probably good enough, honestly, for how little I'm actually getting to paper stores right now.
Yeah.
I love to tell my story. And this is not Stan tooting his own horn, but more about like the benefits of me paying attention to stuff for the dive down and then just trying random stuff. Where the first time I like caught a whiff of Shredder was when it was in a Pioneer prelim result that I think went like 3-1 in Phoenix. And I said, ooh, that's interesting. I should try this because of the dive down. And I did, and it was good. And then I played against it, and my opponent used it to very good measure. So I checked my LGS, and this was the day before it popped, and I got my set at $1.50 a piece.
Oh.
And they had 5, and I bought 4. And now I'm just like kicking myself for not just buying the 5.
Hey, that's one person who got another one, Stan.
That's what I'm thinking. Although I assume that by the time that other person got wind of it, they were already expensive, but still.
Yeah. I do know the first couple of deck lists that I saw that had it in it. And one was from Aspiring Spike, who had said that he was going to try Grixis Death Shadow with Ledger Shredder. And then
played it in the challenge too.
Yeah, that was a couple days later, and I actually watched a lot of the challenge while I was playing the same deck. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then I also saw Jesse Robkin, who is a member of the Nation, rising MTGO writer, player, Chicago local, had posted a 5-0 that she got with blue-red tempo flyers in Pioneer featuring Ledger Shredder and Lofty Denial in a kind of tempo-y flyer shell. I think that those were the first people that made me go, oh, I should pay attention to this card again. And reports quickly popped up after that of the deck being played in basically every format, up to and including Legacy, honestly. And I think someone told me that people are playing it in Vintage as well, which I don't know if that's true, but
wow.
Yeah.
I mean, they do have
verify.
more good 0 mana spells, so.
Yeah.
Can be cast off of Lotus, so.
Yeah. And like you said, after that, we had a bona fide Magic paper card buyout on Thursday of last week, I guess, maybe Wednesday of last week, where suddenly the card, it was Tuesday. Tuesday, it was a $2 card. And then according to Goldfish on Wednesday, it was everywhere was sold out and it cost $10 on Goldfish as well. So it went for one day, it went from $2 to $10 according to the TCG player data. It's been years since I think we've seen a paper card buyout, which is pretty, in a standard paper card buyout in particular.
Yeah, I mean, not much, especially where it's like, sure, you might see like Cavalier of Thorns go from like 12 to 18 or something like that. And it's like, oh, dang, I wish I would have got my play set at 10 or something like that. But this is a 5-up, so it's quite a big deal.
Yeah. So it's showing up in tempo, it's showing up in combo, it's showing up in whatever Phoenix is, it's showing up in all over the place. So I think we should talk about that card for a minute. So let's start with reading it. I'm sure everybody knows what it is, but in case you haven't looked lately, here's what it does. Ledger Shredder. It costs a generic and a blue for a creature bird advisor with flying. And it just says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledger Shredder connives. And what that means is draw a card, then discard a card. If you discard a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. And it is a 1/3. That's all it is.
It seems innocuous. But
Doesn't even sound that good.
Yeah, it's, yeah.
Is this going to be the episode where we reveal that we don't even think it's that good?
Depends on you, I guess, because I'm certainly not going to say that. But I do think I'm really annoyed that this is not a card that we talked about during spoiler season. I feel like it's like should have seen it, should have talked about it, but a 1/3 flyer for 2 is not even draft playable most times. And really all this one is a 1/3 flyer for 2 with the set mechanic attached to it.
Honestly, I think that's why we probably ignored it. It's just like, oh, it has connive. It can't be good. Connive's not good.
We need to stop doing that because connive is totally fine.
Yeah.
And I think that we should talk about all the stuff that makes Ledger Shredder good, just so people who maybe were underwhelmed when they first read it can also see why. So let's go through big picture point by point. And I wrote out a little outline here. Welcome to hear new points, but I'm going to take us through a journey on why a card like Ledger Shredder is good in so many different formats. And the first thing is it rewards you for doing something that you always want to do anyway for no mana, which is cast more than one spell per turn. And that's what the connive mechanic does. But looting for free when you're already doing something you like doing is great. And I think it's just the tip of the iceberg here, but it's really the place to start.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Right?
It just fundamentally works with what you're already doing. You're not stretching yourself to do anything weird. You're playing a creature and trying to do what your deck is already designed to do.
Yeah. The thing that I think most people didn't realize about connive and about Ledger Shredder in particular is that it doesn't only count when you cast spells. It counts when your opponent casts spells as well. So it also rewards you for when your opponent does something that they generally want to do a lot, which is everybody wants to cast more than one spell a turn. It's fundamental to getting ahead on tempo in Magic. That's why cards with lower mana values are better. And suddenly, Ledger Shredder is a card that rewards you on both halves of that equation. If your opponent is trying to get ahead, suddenly you get better card quality and your creature grows. If you're trying to get ahead, you get better card quality and your creature grows. Seems like a win-win.
Agreed.
Where were you when you realized that was how Ledger Shredder worked?
When someone told me.
Yeah, I was laying in bed playing a Pioneer League, and I had a Ledger Shredder out, and suddenly it was growing on my opponent's turn.
And you were like, this is a bug. I need to tell somebody.
I was like, I have to report this. I have to get my PPs back. You know what I think about this fact about the card? Like, I don't think that's an oversight. I think this is where they pushed it for maybe like some type of constructed play with maybe like in the back of their head, they're like, if that becomes a problem, we'll just fix it in Alchemy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't think this card is a problem. I don't think this is one of those things where it's like, it's not a problematic card. It's just very high value because like Dave said, not only are you doing what you want, but if your opponent is playing any sort of low CMC deck, which in most formats they probably are, then you're getting value off of it too. What's good is like, it's not even just growing, which is good enough. It's like you're looting on their turn, which can be super, valuable for getting to the cards that you want. So just win-win.
Yeah, and I think it's worth stopping here for a second just to be really clear that part of the reason I think we missed this is it likes Shane said, because of connive, right? And we didn't really think about the condition that was triggering connive on this particular card, because connive is not, it's a keyword reminder text ability, I think, right? Is what they say. It's not like a keyword. Maybe it is a keyword because of the way it's written. They're all triggered
connive always does
differently.
the same thing. It just triggers under different circumstances.
Right. Which when you look at a whole list and you're like, God, this card connives for this and this card connives for that and this one, and then you get to Ledger Shredder and you're like, okay, another one that connives for like a random thing. It does make it a little hard to follow the potential, but that's the thing that makes the whole difference, is that this one's connive condition is so much better, I think, than any other cards.
It's almost like those weird like Adventures in the Forgotten Realms things where just like, here's a randomly named ability. This has the same name, does the same thing, but just the triggering effect is just different for everyone. So it does, if we ever see this again, or you all out there in the nation ever see it again, just like pay attention to what the trigger ability is, because when it's something like, I want to cast a second spell,
Yeah.
and I get to loot and grow my flyer, it seems pretty good.
Yeah, when I cast a second spell and it doesn't cost anything. Now, there was a whole bunch of cards in Battle for Zendikar, I think, that also triggered off of the second time you cast a spell in a given turn, but it was only you. So I think the big thing here is you got to pay attention to the fact that it's both players. But anyway, enough of why we missed it. The third thing that I think makes Ledger Shredder really good is that, as much as I said that a 2-mana 1/3 flyer is not really a great rate, and sometimes you don't play it in draft even, it's actually a really good rate because it has upside. It's literally just a creature that is generally vanilla for the cost that you're paying, and then it has a really powerful mechanic on it on top of that. And the big thing of this, of course, is the body that comes with Ledger Shredder. A 1/3 is extremely relevant in a number of the different formats that we play, because in Pioneer, it's mostly out of the range of red removal. It does things in Modern, like block Ragavan right out the gate, which is good. It doesn't die to an Undeliriumed Unholy Heat. So there are lots of common removal spells that actually have a hard time dealing with Ledger Shredder early in the game, which help you be able to concentrate on protecting it if you want to later in the game against the relevant removal spells.
Yeah, it's really good because, like you said, there's not a lot of, especially instant speed interaction that does 3 damage early on in Pioneer and Explorer especially. And then if you, let's say, play it on turn 3 and then keep up some mana, you can even do things to grow it out of Strangle range or something like that, because it has the 3 toughness to start with. You can get up to 4 at instant speed.
Yeah. And that takes us to the next point, I think, which is that it gets huge. I don't think I can overstate how often in these formats you can connive lots of times, and your opponents make you connive lots of times, especially as the formats get older and spells get more mana efficient. So I played with Shredder in Explorer, Pioneer, and in Modern over the last week, and it's, I saved Modern for last, and really, it's not uncommon to see Ledger Shredders that are 5/7s, 4/6s, 6/8s. I've seen huge ones. And I really feel like, it's even bigger in games where people don't have access to black removal to draw into, or where your counter spells are doing their jobs. It's really kind of like Tarmogoyf, I think, sometimes, in the sense that it has really good value for the cards that you, it gets really huge based on something, a payoff that's really simple to achieve.
I mean, I'll also say the same thing here, which is Sprite Dragon does this. And I find Sprite Dragon fine.
It's very different. It's really, really different what Sprite Dragon does and what this does.
Hold on. If we're talking about getting huge, Sprite Dragon gets huge for doing what your deck wants to do, right? I mean, of course, I'm not saying that the Sprite Dragon is comparable to this because of all the other aspects that we're listing off here. But I think that in terms of the getting huge thing, that's just good because it's a better Sprite Dragon effect, which is a card that you play in a lot of, is-it-based aggressive or tempo-y style decks, because you're doing what you want and you get a big flyer out of it. And this does the same thing on your opponent's turn as well, and does more for you. There's a few more points we have coming up.
Yeah.
So I would actually like to just spend a little extra time on this point, because is every 2 drop Tarmogoyf? Like, is that the Tarmogoyf comparison is a little specious to me, because I almost see this as like a fixed, standard friendly Dragon Rage channeler, because the thing that to me is good about this card is not its growth rate, but its filter ability more than anything. Like, I just like that it kind of sits there and generates value, even if it stays as a 1/3.
Well, now you're getting us into the next point.
True. Looting is very good.
Well, okay,
That's the point. Yeah.
but I guess the thing that I didn't say is like my shredders are good, even though they're not always getting huge, because like sometimes it's like turn 4 or 5, and I'm just like ditching like my stupid Spire Bluff canals or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like that's where I like realized I was most impressed with it. Where it's just like it's just keeping my hand full of action and getting rid of like really dead draws. And the only times I'm actually like growing it is if I'm like dodging bad removal spells against control decks, or like extra cantrips when like that's just air anyway, and I'd rather take the point of power over like a little velocity, you know?
I think the reason that people and Dave would do this here is compare a 2-drop to Tarmogoyf is because Tarmogoyf is good because it's a 2-drop that gets huge for doing what you want to be doing, which is, playing different types of spells, filling your graveyard, removing your creatures, removing your opponent's creatures, playing fetch lands, things like that. This does the same thing, but like you're saying, Stan, is like it's better than Tarmogoyf probably in a lot more decks because it does more, right? It filters your hand, it makes your opponent not want to do certain things sometimes. Like anytime you can live in your opponent's head rent free and like just disrupt what they're thinking about doing because of a triggered ability you have, that's really good. And that, of course, that might happen randomly now and then with Tarmogoyf, but not typically. And so I think that I understand where Dave's coming from, but I also definitely hear what you're saying, which is like we're beyond the era of Goyf, right? As being like a benchmark.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot of people who are kind of like, you can't say it's as good as Tarmogoyf. We don't have to go on for this forever. You know what I mean? But like,
we should.
All I'm trying to say here is that this is a threat that can close a game out by itself. And you shouldn't discount that idea. And I definitely have won games by making this big enough to just win and protect it. It depends on what deck you're playing it in. But this is a card that can and should be used in a plan to get to in certain decks that it can close a game by itself. It's a four power flyer. You can close out games pretty fast like that if you're in a medium control deck or a mid range deck that's in a controlling kind of position in a game. Its ability to attack is not a joke.
I guess I just feel like making it big is the hardest part of using this card, because I seldom want to get rid of good cards to it when I can just get rid of bad cards. And usually the bad cards are extra lands.
So here's what I would say. I think you should look deep in yourself.
Get rid of good cards more.
And get rid of good cards more often. And I think we can talk about a little bit more in the next section, which is the next thing that I think about this card, of course, is that looting itself as an ability is very, very good, like Stan is trying to say, especially when you do not have to pay mana for it, right? I think people forget all the time that looting can be good on its own, and people can get bent out of shape with the fact that Shredder only grows when you discard a non-land card. Look, it's right there in the notes, Stan. It's always your choice for what you want to do. Are you in a game plan where Shredder should be your closer? It's possible. Are you in a game plan where it should be your filter? That's also possible. You can. I don't mind the comparison to Dragon's Rage Channeler or saying that it's a fixed Dragon Rage Channeler. I think that's totally fair. I think the fact is, Channeler is plenty good to close a game out on its own in certain deck plans as well. Ledger Shredder is too, and I think even in more game plans in some decks, because it can get bigger on its own if you want it. If you need it to for some reason.
Yeah, one of the things that I think a lot more about, going back to one of our recent episodes, Dan, where it's like do some math, right? And I think about, is like this consider worth 2-3 damage if I pitch this and I grow my card and my Shredder hits for 1 damage more this turn, hits for 1 damage more the next turn, 1 damage more the turn after that. That's 3 more damage I got out of a consider. And you can be like, well, this consider could be anything, even a lightning bolt.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. The first couple times I play, and this isn't a blanket heuristic that you can apply to playing this card, but I did find myself originally being like, I'm going to get rid of lands, okay? And then later on, I started to be like, oh, I drew an opt off of Ledger Shredder. I'm not going to play my opt or consider. I'm just going to ditch cantrips because I'm at a part of the game where I don't care about cantrips anymore. I'm trying to do other stuff. I want my mana to do other things potentially. So it's more complex than that. I do think one thing, hopefully people understand with looting too, there's no downside to looting when you only have one good card in your hand, let's say, and you're like, well, I don't want to draw another good card and have to discard one of my good cards. That is a really bad fallacy in your thinking about a logical fallacy in Magic. If you want to go back to
episode 1 of the Dive
episode
Down.
1 it's part of episode 1 that we talked with Stan where he was thinking about thought scouring good cards and whether that was a good thing or not. But even more, so one of the original episodes that I remember of limited resources from, 13 years ago or however long ago now is where Brian Spain and Marshall invented something called the looting game. And basically they were trying to explain to people, you should always loot with a card like Merfolk Looter because, the namesake of the looting ability, by the way, because if you imagine that your deck is just filled with numbers, okay, cards that have number values on them, they go from 1 to 100. Every turn, even if you had an 80 in your hand, you should still loot and see what else you get because there's no downside to it. And especially when you're playing in Modern where you're trying to get to Delirium or who knows, you're trying to fill your yard for a Delve spell, there is no reason to not keep going with Ledger Shredder. Your hand can always be better, and you can always find an option that's more creative that you weren't anticipating. And then of course, when you pair this with, the decks that I was playing it in towards the end here, where I was playing it in Modern with things like Dragon's Rage Channeler and Mishra's Bauble, the card selection is absurd when you get together with Dragon's Rage Channeler here too, because suddenly you're going, well, Surveil first, let me arrange my stack so that Surveil trigger, I resolve that first. I get to see what it is. Then I get to see what I draw with Ledger Shredder. Then I have information. Maybe I get to draw into an answer. You can do the same sort of thing with Mishra's Bauble. So it gives you another way to turn Mishra's Bauble into an awkward opt. It's really, really good. Looting is extremely good here. And then lastly, it fills your graveyard well.
Yeah, like you said, that's what you want to do. I tell you what, what's good in Pioneer? Casting Treasure Cruise. it's really good. It's too good probably, but for now I'm gonna keep casting them.
This conversation has just kind of got me thinking that the looting decisions you have to make, and this is going to sound absurdly obvious, but I think there's a lot to digest. Is it's matchup dependent. Right? It's, again, thinking about what your opponents are doing and trying to understand, what are going to be the best cards in their hand and how they interact with the best cards in your hand or on the board. And I feel like there are some games where actually looting away action is a liability because your opponent can have Fatal Push. And sometimes it's more important to be able to, draw out all their interaction with things like Shredder or other cheap threats so that eventually you land the one that sticks rather than over investing in a single resource only to lose it without really gaining that much value.
For sure.
And here's the other thing, you made a point about cantrips, which I think is actually maybe a point of tension. I feel like Shredder finds itself lately has been finding itself in decks that want to cast cantrips because it either A, wants to cast 2 spells in a turn, or it's surrounded by other creatures that care about the spells that you're casting, be it Phoenix, Sprite Dragon, Dragon Horde, 2-drop, Arcanist. I don't remember what.
Dreadhorde.
Thank you.
Arcanist, yeah.
So it's that's kind of the other calculus that you then have to do is if I'm not actually getting rid of my opt here to get an extra point of power, is that opt going to generate value with something else that's in my hand, or am I just kind of playing the what if game?
Yeah.
That's what's good about Modern. That's what's good about Magic. Is you get to make these kind of decisions and think about different opportunity costs and lines and what's the best value here? Is this the kind of deck that's showing me that they're going to have damage-based removal and I want to grow this out of that? Or are they a black-based deck that I don't want to overinvest? And that's the kind of thing that makes this game really great, is that there's just so many different matchups and ways to play the cards that you draw and that you think you can draw too. And
yeah, and there's so many different ways to slice it. So what this all adds up is just a card that is useful to so many different types of decks because the mechanics that are on it engage with so many different game plans in Magic. Right? It can be a cheap tempo threat. that grows just a little bit for you. It can become a huge threat if you want it to, for some reason in a scenario that you're in. It helps your overall card quality as you're going through your game and through your deck. Whenever you cast more than one spell, it can be a combo enabler for decks that, in graveyard decks. The huge thing that it does as well is it's also a payoff that fits into these graveyard decks that is not reliant on the graveyard to win. And that's something that I think does separate it from Dragon's Rage Channeler or something like that. Not that, DRC is a great card. Not trying to say it's not a great card. Tarmogoyf is a good card. Not trying to say it's not. But what happens in these decks sometimes is, if you think about Murktide, people commonly bring in cards that attack your graveyard in Murktide because they want to make your Unholy Heats bad. They want to make it hard for you to delve into a Murktide. They want to make Dragon's Rage Channeler worse, right? Because they get you off of Delirium. Your game plan is less powerful. If you have something like Ledger Shredder in there as well, you have a threat that still enables all those strategies with those good cards. But if they attack your graveyard, your Ledger Shredder still might be huge. And so that's something that I think bolsters game plans like that as well. And you'll see that repeated in lots of different decks. It's not just Murktide. It's not just Modern. It's not just Delirium. There are a lot of things that engage in that kind of way.
So, Dave, you've convinced me. I'll give this Ledger Shredder a try. Do you want to start talking to me about some of the decks that we have seen Ledger Shredder appear in?
Yeah, there's a lot. Let's talk about Pioneer and Explorer first.
Yeah, why not? The people's favorite.
Can we talk about Phoenix first, since it's where Stan started? Now there's there's 3 different red-blue decks that I think we all tried it out in Pioneer/Explorer, but why don't we start with Phoenix as an homage to episode 1 of the Dive Down Low those many years ago?
Yeah, Stan, how have you been playing with this?
So, I only tried it in Phoenix during that one introductory session, but it essentially just replaced Thing in the Ice and relegated Thing in the Ice to the sideboard.
Interesting.
It is interesting. Because, on the one hand, like, Thing in the Ice and Phoenix can sometimes be like a little iffy if you're playing a late Thing in the Ice, or you have like a turn 2 Thing in the Ice and then you manage to flip birds before you flip Awoken Horror. Where this is a little bit more of an all in on the one plan of just like, let's fill the graveyard as quickly as possible, let's cycle through as many spells as possible, and then try to get birds out and then attack with a bunch of flyers without necessarily relying on Awoken Horror. I don't know if this helps solve some of the problems that Awoken Horror does, because that, what is it, Cyclonic Rift effect is like part of what makes Thing in the Ice so powerful, especially in a format that's like full of mono green and Winota that will sometimes just take over the board. But I think this also lets you be a little bit more kind of like evasive with your threats, so that even if you do have to eat a Fatal Push or like your bird takes a Flame Blessed Bolt, you still have other evasive threats that can potentially close out the game while you're just like ditching excess cantrips to grow the shredder.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that it didn't end up running all 3 of those cards at once. But I guess if Thing in the Ice has such bad tension with, you don't want to flip it after you've put a bunch of counters on Ledger Shredder, then you just kind of have to swap it out. But
right.
Yeah, Phoenix with only 8 threats is super, super interesting to me. But I've certainly been on the receiving end of here come, it looks like my deck isn't working, and then suddenly I cast Galvanic Iteration into Temporal Trespass, and then I kill you with a bunch of Phoenixes. Like it works.
Yeah,
So,
I mean it's 8 with an asterisk because you have so much velocity. Like you're playing 8 1-mana cantrips. You're like also maybe playing like an Is It Charm or some other stuff to just draw through your deck that you're finding something sooner than later.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk quickly about the deck that I played too here, which is the Blue-Red Flyers deck that Jesse, who I mentioned earlier, had 5-0'd with at the beginning of the week. A lot of people tried it out earlier in the week. It's really a Flyers tempo deck. It's basically the same spells with some not the same spells as Phoenix, but it has what you'd expect in a blue-red deck. It's ops and it's considers and your expressive iteration. It's got Sprite Dragon and burn spells. It's got Lofty Denial because of all the flyers in the deck, and then of course it actually has Terramander as well, which I think can be an interesting threat, which is another kind of graveyard payoff for all of your shredding that you do, all the cards that you put into the graveyard, and then Terramander becomes 1 mana to make bigger. You have counter spells to protect it, and it just kind of goes from there.
Yes, Pteramander weirdly much better later than early. Like a Pteramander in your opening hand is usually just like, I don't want this card because it's going to die.
Unless you have Lofty Denial too. Like it's almost like this 4-card combo of like Pteramander, Lofty Denial, and 2 lands.
Yeah.
Then you can like almost do a Spirits Impression.
I played a really similar version to this deck, an Explorer version of this deck that I saw someone else make, and they said that they had good results with it. And of course it loses the delve spells of Dig Through Time or Treasure Cruise if you want to play that. So it looked like it kind of was shoring up sort of the interactive tempo nature. It had a couple Spell Pierce main deck, and in addition to the Lofty Denial and things like that. So Dave, what do you think about this deck in particular and how it is able to leverage Ledger Shredder?
I mean, I thought that the plan made a ton of sense. I'm not surprised that people have done well with it and that Jesse got a 5-0 with it or anything like that. I just don't. I would like a deck with a little bit more proactive threats in it, because like you said, Pteramander is kind of rough early in the game. Sprite Dragon's sometimes hard to build, but I do think it's a good take on the deck, especially if you like playing a Spiritsy style, flyers plus counterspell deck. I think it can get there fine. However, I like the list that you tried out quite a bit, which was more of a prowess kind of build that had Soulscar Mage. This is much closer to my heart. I didn't get to try it, but how was this for you?
Well, I want to go back just quickly, sorry Dave, to the Lofty Denial flyers concept. And Stan mentioned this in Discord today, and I was thinking the exact same thing, which is like, I don't really want to be holding spells in my hands to react to what my opponent's doing, at least main deck. Like, I understand like the classic pivot to a more controlling deck so that you can just out tempo and kind of just outvalue your opponent as they try to remove your threats as they grow, and then you counter anything that's really important that they try to do against you. But main deck, I feel like I just want more ways to burn out my opponent, to interact with the board, to have, the threat density here is pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I just think it's a different style of deck. Right.
Sure.
Like I think that this is much more akin, like I said, to a Spiritsy tempo kind of deck. And
but why not just play
it's
Spirits?
Even close. Well,
and also what Shane's saying is like, you can build this deck to do both and be proactive first and then pivot into a more tempo controlled plan afterwards based on what your opponents are going to do against you.
Like, I feel like it's just not using the card as strongly as other decks are, which is just like, I don't want to be using 2 mana, like Mana League style things in my card that wants me to be churning through my deck. And I understand what you're saying, like Stan was saying earlier, which is just like, look, it doesn't always need to be this gigantic, huge creature, but that's what gets us the maximum value out of playing it. Otherwise, we could be using other threats. We could just be playing Mono Blue Spirits or something like that.
I think it's a fine way to take Ledger Shredder, right? I don't think that playing Ledger Shredders with counter spells is a misfit. Definitely don't think that after playing it that way in Modern too. I guess all the decks that I played with Ledger Shredder really were more of this style, where it's like, I got some counter spells, I got some removal, I got some card draw. I think really this is a shell that lets you put Ledger Shredder with expressive iteration in a counter style deck. That's what all these are, right?
That's the real Splinter Twin situation here.
Right, and that's good. But I really don't think that's like
it's not a non.
I wouldn't think of that as a non-vote at all. Like, I don't think so at all.
Yeah.
Like, I think that this is one of those things where it's like, this card goes in so many different decks that people are going to try it in all these different ways. And so we've already, it's like Stan talked about what's essentially a combo tempo deck. I'm talking about a straight up tempo deck that has disruption, spell-based disruption. You're about to talk about a deck that's
the
full-on aggro.
Yeah, this deck rules.
And I think it's just, this card fits everywhere.
I saw this deck get posted by was it like Andy Awkward or something like that? What's that person's name?
I think that was the screen name.
Yeah, and it is a prowess in Pioneer, so it gets to do the is a prowess things of Consider Opt, Swift Spear, Play with Fire, Soulscar Mage. This one has Sprite Dragons, Expressive Iteration, of course, Ledger Shredder, it has a couple Strangle, and an interesting addition here, of course, 4 Treasure Cruise, but 4 Reckless Rage, which is something that we've seen play in different kind of prowessy style, feathery style decks, where it's like, hey, if I target my creature, it's growing anyway. So I don't care. I'm just going to basically have my own little version of Unholy Heat in my Pioneer deck.
Yeah, the thing with Reckless Rage and a 1/2 prowess creature is that as soon as you cast the rage, it triggers prowess so that it doesn't kill your Swift Spear, but is dealing 4 to whatever opponent's creature is.
You can also target Ledger Shredder with
True.
it.
Yes,
so
exactly.
12 of your cards do it. It's Sprite Dragon's really the only one that doesn't do it out the box, and really you only need 1 token on it to be able to make it work.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
it's extremely reliable. Like the only real issue is that you have to have a creature to target of your own. So it can be just a blank piece of cardboard if you don't have anything on your own board.
Yeah, I love Reckless Rage. I played it a lot in Feather style decks when Pioneer first came around, but it is a high variance card, because the other problem with it is if you queue into something so it doesn't have the clause that says you can target a planeswalker with it either. Right. So it's not like you can save yourself by killing Karn with it. There are plenty of matchups where this card is just like, bleh. But I also think it's kind of a necessary evil in a format where you're going to run into Winota a lot. So I think it makes a ton of sense in this deck.
Dave, what if I told you that this deck also has a safety valve so that if you draw a dead Reckless Rage, you can just like pitch it and get an extra point of damage off of it?
And that's a huge thing that of course red-white, those heroic decks Feather decks didn't have access to, is that sometimes you would get Reckless Rage and it would just sit there the whole game. Now you can just discard it and move on, which is fantastic.
So this deck is, I think, quite good. I think there's, which is weird for me to say. I think one of the reasons that makes it a little bit better is that, while Fatal Push hits every threat in this deck, there are such a large number of threats that one of the things that I experience in playing Rakdos midrange is I run out of removal. And you could say, Shane, why don't you just wait and only take care of the important things? There's a couple of reasons for that. Is that the deck like this has a large number of important things that if you don't deal with them, they're going to do quite a bit of damage to you. Like you say, oh, okay, I'm going to play my Bone Crusher Giant on 3 mana, and then that's going to stonewall them. Well, then they just strangle it. Or they play with fire with a Soulscar Mage out, and then it makes your blocker insignificant and unable to do what you were hoping it's going to do. The deck is designed, or Reckless Rage, the deck is designed to take advantage of those kind of matchups and say, if you are trying to stonewall me with your blockers, I'm going to get through. I'm going to get damage in, especially with my flyers in the air.
The only thing I think about this current list from Andy Awkward, and this is just something I would say after, because it's looking so close to what blue-red prowess looked like in Modern, in a sense, is I really would want some kind of additional cheap counterspell in the sideboard. Like I feel like 2 Spell Pierce is less than I would want postboard in a deck like this. I really loved in these decks being able to, if you do know you're against black, removal decks, having cheaper access to cheaper kind of counter magic, I think is really helpful in this sense. And so you got to make choices in deck building. So I understand how you end up with only 2 of them, but I would want at least 3. I would think, especially when you don't have anything main to help protect things.
Yeah.
It's also good against early planeswalkers and stuff like that. So, just something that I would look to tweak some more, but
for sure gets you out of the desperation 3 mana anger the gods type thing where it's like,
exactly.
Like, oh, thank goodness. I do like that you can play Yugantha as your companion, which really jukes people consistently thinking they're playing it's like a sack deck, and so it's just like, nope, I'm not. And so it can be helpful game 1 even when people keep hands they might not otherwise keep.
I'm just taking a look at Jesse's list again, the list I played, to see why could
because of Dig.
Gigantha be played in this one too? What am I
Dig
missing?
Through Time.
Oh, Brazen Bar or
Dig Through Time.
That's what it is.
Yeah, Treasure Cruise is absurd, by the way. Like this deck fills the graveyard so quickly and so efficiently, and then you just refill with Treasure Cruise, and you just 100% feel like you're doing something broken. So, and this is probably the first deck when I'm really getting reps with Expressive Iteration. Like I just haven't played a lot of Izzet decks with this card.
You don't say.
It is one of them. It's one of the most absurd cards I've ever played. It's
the best card in Magic right now, Shane.
It's bonkers. It's bonkers good.
Other than Ledger Shredder.
2 mana draw 2. Yeah, I love it. Okay. Anyway, so that's a lot on that deck, but I think that deck's good. I think all these decks are going to be iterated upon and messed with, and that's another way of saying iterated upon, by the way, and see some success.
Did we incept Shane?
I was just wondering the same thing. I'm like, what world are we in where Shane is suddenly willing to play blue-red prowess in Pioneer?
I mean, I like playing with good
We didn't even
cards.
ask him to.
Well, here's a real
Didn't
thing.
ask him to.
I barely got to use Ledger Shredder. Like, I played a large number of games, and like I kept winning with like 9/9 sprite dragons, and like my Ledger Shredders would just die or never hit the battlefield. And it's just like, that's fine. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I think we did it, Stan. I think podcast is over. This 4-year-long experiment to get Shane to play blue cards is finally.
I have
come
all
to an
these
end.
cards too. Oh no, I don't. I don't own Riverglide Pathway yet. Oh, I kept not buying them.
That's okay.
Last deck, an Explorer,
Yeah.
Pioneer. What do we got?
Really different from all the Is It decks that we're talking about, and it's a combo deck, and that is Esper Greasefang. Definitely played against it in Explorer. I don't have as much experience seeing this deck in Pioneer. I'm assuming some version of it is around in Pioneer as well. But Greasefang, this is exactly the type of deck that we were talking about towards the end of the segment. We were talking about just about Shredder on its own, where we said it enables your combo. It enables your ability to get the cards you want in the graveyard, but also if someone messes with your graveyard, you still have a threat that is big enough to potentially close the game out for you. And let me tell you, I lost against Greasefang a couple of times on Arena recently where that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, Greasefang, that is a deck that it's absurd that it got a new piece of tech, because I feel like Greasefang is almost the Pioneer version of Living End, where it's just like it has one of the sickest game ones in the format that just like abuses the graveyard to generate like so much power, overwhelm the board no matter what opponent is doing. And then sometimes like if your sideboard plan is good, you can just kind of deal with it there, but still.
Yeah. I am just coming to the realization that we are definitely not going to be able to talk about the other decks from the patrons, and I just want to apologize to people right now. But let's keep this Shredder train rolling. I mean, do you guys like Greasefang? Would you play Greasefang? I mean, it seems like a pretty tight combo deck now that I've watched it a couple of times. It wins on like turn 3. Does it win in like turn 3?
Yeah,
basically,
in
yeah. Like
sometimes
you might as well
brutal.
just scoop once they do it once, unless you have like
It uses the Demir Looter card into Greasefang equals win often.
Right? You
like
can stop it, but
your best game one plans against it are like certain counter magic if you have it, and like in Pioneer you don't, because like most counter magic is really bad, and you have to play mono blue to have a fighting chance. Like if you're running Settle the Wreckage, that's pretty good. And like if you're playing some game one artifact hate like a Soul Guide Lantern, Hand Disruption might do it too, but then like they'll sometimes just like top deck a Greasefang.
let's draw into it. Yeah, you can't Thoughtseize their deck, right? So
Greasefang is annoying.
So moving on to Ledger Shredder in Modern, obviously lots of stuff going on here. Similar styles of decks in some ways, but I think the deck that we could look at first is Murktide, essentially. A bunch of people trying Ledger Shredder in Murktide with one super surprising thing, and that is that some people are taking out Deathrite Shaman for Ledger Shredder and just playing Ragavan, Ledger Shredder, and Murktide. Basically the same deck.
Otherwise, I mean, I kind of think this is experimentation that is waiting to be proven.
Yes.
Just because
I'm not saying that this is. None of this is saying that this is settled law.
Yeah,
This is
right.
canon.
We're not condoning. We're just responding. Yeah, but my initial reaction to that is like that's a pretty brave move, because part of what makes DRC so powerful is that it's a turn one play that you can protect forever and it takes over the games, whereas Shredder is a little bit more vulnerable, being a turn two play that dies to most of the relevant removal in the format.
Yeah. But it is interesting to note that this person came in 5th place and went 7-0 in a Modern Challenge with this deck. This is Yumi Kawa. This is someone whose name Yumi Kawaneku.
Yumi Kawaneku.
Yep, we all know them. Yumi Kawaneku.
Dave, did you say Deathrite Shaman, by the way?
Did I say Deathrite Shaman? You all know what I mean. It's Dragon's Rage Channeler.
Yeah, not legal in Modern.
Don't send me any letters. I know who it is.
Angry tweets.
You know who this is. So, I mean, I think it makes total sense here. We already talked a lot about the synergy between something like Bauble and Ledger Shredder, between all the cheap spells in Modern and Ledger Shredder. It makes a ton of sense in Murktide as another flyer. And, like I said earlier, I definitely had ledger shredders that were as big as Murktide regents that I've had in the past as well. I've had a ledger shredder that blocked a Murktide regent. Sorry.
Whoa.
How, like, are you not playing against interactive decks? I don't, like, what I don't understand is how your shredders are surviving that long.
Yeah, right?
Skill.
It's really good.
One eyebrow.
It's like me when I would complain about the prowess decks in Modern, where it's just like they're always dying to removal. It's like sometimes, and then you guys are like, "What are you talking about, Shane? Just be good."
Sometimes things don't die. I mean, but if you like, let's take a look at, is it like in a mirror match where if I was playing a ledger shredder against Murktide, if I grow it out of Unholy Heat range, if I keep them off of Delirium for a while and grow it out of Lightning Bolt range, and then grow it over time out of Unholy Heat range, they can't kill it in this deck, right? They can bounce it, but that's kind of where you're at. And so there's, the range of times where the cards are good against Ledger Shredder are finite, sort of, in this particular deck, and that happens with other decks too. So it's not like it happened all the time, but it's definitely a thing that can happen.
Can I also, another sidebar?
Yeah.
Just looking at this modern list, 2 unlicensed hearse in
Yes.
the sideboard.
Yes.
Yeah, I played it in my Pioneer deck. I just didn't get a chance to use it against anything.
I think that card is definitely good. Like, I just think it's a good piece of graveyard removal. It's going to be in a lot of places, mostly because it comes in and gets rid of 2 cards, and it turns into a threat, which is a nice bonus. But yeah, it's a good card, Stan. You got that one right.
I was thinking about our collective analyses of this card, and something I didn't say at the time that I think is becoming more and more true of new sets, where like we were looking at this card against Scavenging Ooze, and you guys were like saying like, well, Scavenging Ooze gains life, blah 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 blah, cha 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 cha. Sometimes you have like enough green mana that you can grow it like really rapidly, and I'm starting to wonder if like we can't hold any old cards as sacred cows anymore. Period.
I think that's true. I think the other thing is we just didn't talk about the fact that Scavenging Ooze is only available in green decks, and there are decks that aren't green that are going to want this effect. And that's just what we literally didn't talk about that when we were discussing the card, and that's a huge aspect of it. So yes,
sure,
Scavenging Ooze is sometimes good, but
I still haven't won with or seen anyone win with this card, so it could just still be in testing phase. By the way, I mean, I'm sure it's a good card. It's one of those things where it's just like, again, it has to last for a while, and it has to have something to crew it. And I think those are very real possibilities. And so I think it's a cool addition to the suite of graveyard interaction that we have.
Yeah.
That also can attack.
Yep.
Yeah. I just wanted to make that point of just like, it's so hard to like consider old cards as like, if anything, like they have to prove that they're better than the new cards these days more often than vice versa, just because like the power creep is everywhere.
Yeah. I think we should just be more aware that power creep is a thing and be more forgiving to new cards, or at least look at them a little bit harder for a minute and go, okay, why is this better, instead of saying why it's not better.
Let's keep talking about some more decks.
Yes. So next deck I want to talk about is what I consider to be Murktide's strange cousin, and that is Grixis Shadow. So Aspiring Spike, as I mentioned earlier, played Grixis Shadow with Ledger Shredder in it. I played it. I played a league with it too. I think it's excellent in Shadow. And the card, what you cut from Shadow is Fatal Push in the main deck. Going out there with no Fatal Push, which is a little sketchy. It definitely made it kind of hard a couple of times to do some stuff. Also cutting back on 1 Unholy Heat and then cutting 1 land is what it feels like the difference between the lists are to me. But Drown in the Loch closes some of that gap that Fatal Push has had before. And honestly, the way that you cast 1-mana spells in this deck with Mishra's Bauble, all those kind of things, on top of having Ledger Shredder's ability to loot and get you through the quality that you want with Dragon's Rage Channeler, it just felt like it really, really went together super well. I did pretty well with it, honestly. I've had a rough go of Magic the last 3 weeks or so. Shout out to all the people in Discord who have been losing a lot as well. But this is the most kind of at home that I felt playing with anything in the last couple of weeks for sure, other than Mono Blue Spirits, which I've been doing well with in Explorer. But Yeah, I think this deck is really good. I think if you're a Shadow person, you should definitely try it out. Really, I haven't seen Michael Rapp talk about it at all yet, so I'd be curious to see what he thinks. But I really enjoyed playing a Shadow list that had 18 threats in it as well instead of 14. So I think that's another thing to just take into account as well.
Yeah, I even think that, like, and correct me if your experiences are different, but pairing it with something like Thoughtseize and Inquisition is interesting, not because they're cheap spells to double spell with, but because it can be so vulnerable to just like a single bolt, and it's really easy to just clear the way. Turn one, get a removal spell out of their hand. Turn two, Ledger Shredder that you've like preemptively protected.
Yeah, the other aspect of that's really good with those kind of spells is that when you don't want them later in the game, they're easy tosses to connive.
Yes.
And so, like you said about the earlier cards that we were talking about, same thing.
Reckless Rage.
Yeah. Worth mentioning. Someone, Bear Spider in the chat, just mentioned that Grixis Death Shadow doesn't have any main deck dress downs right now. They're all on the sideboard. I think that you could probably reconfigure to put one or two main deck if you wanted to, but you'd have to cut down on some other things. So. Yeah, maybe this is a card that bumps that out of main deck as well. So you don't really have the combo kill with Shadow, which is kind of interesting. Like you don't have that threat in the main deck in this version, but I think it works okay.
Well, I'm happy for you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Good deck.
Okay. Do we talk about Reanimator yet?
No, but I think we should.
Yes, we should.
I guess we talked about it in the breakdown from the event, right? A little bit, but
yeah, this is a little bit different. This is like I heard rumor about this deck. Canister has been streaming this deck. He's been working on iterations of this deck. Some have had like Murktide Regent, some have had Ledger Shredder. And what's interesting about these is there's no Unmarked Grave, there's no Faithful Mending in the Ledger Shredder version. There's Consider, Tainted Indulgence, that card we talked about before, and the Shredder are all filling your graveyard with your Archon of Cruelties when you need to, or just cards you don't have a lot of value for. You persist them back when you need to, or you can just win with Ledger, or if you're playing the Murktide version, I suppose you do that. So there is a good player evidence of a deck that they thought was worth at least experimenting with. He has a VOD on YouTube if you want to watch like 4.5 hours of 2 different Reanimator decks going through leagues. So enjoy that if you can. That's just so much VOD watching for me there. But
yeah.
What do we have next? I think this one is more interesting. It's more novel.
Yeah, and then this I think is the last deck that we have. One of the last decks we have to talk about, at least in Modern, just for now. This is the deck that I think everybody thinks of as pure-ish combo, which is Breach. Is it Breach with Ledger Shredder in it as well? Jesse, who we talked to earlier about the Pioneer deck, also posted a 5-0 with this deck.
Let's clarify. The Jessie we keep referring to, this is at Titty Pills on Twitter.
Yep.
You probably see her popping up a lot. She was on a recent episode of Grindcast. She's been working with the professor at Tolarian Academy. Follow Titty Pills. Great content, great player, and a good friend.
And yeah, I think that in our Discord, people were talking about trying Ledger Shredder in Breach 2, and it just kind of all came together. Still works, but this is one of those things where I think that she even referred to it in the tweet where she talked about the list with a hinge threat, I think she called it, or something like that, which is or pivot threat. I think is an interesting way to think about that kind of card, where you're kind of, this is that idea of it's a card that helps fill my graveyard, and it grows from filling my graveyard into a threat, but it's not reliant on the graveyard staying intact in order to continue to be a threat. And so I think that gives you kind of like a good plan B in a deck like Breach. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I understand Breach. Breach is about the least likely deck that I am to pick up in Modern, but I know that a lot of people love this deck, and it's got a lot of power. It's here with that same core of Dragon's Rage Channeler and Ragavan, Expressive Iteration. All these good red-blue cards, still good.
Yeah, so let's tie a bow on Ledger Shredder. I don't know if we need to tie the bow any harder than we did in the intro section of the dive down. And we proceeded to just give you list after list of decks that are taking advantage of this card in different ways. And I think the thing that I heard us say the most this episode is, like, it's a piece that can close the game by itself, but also do a lot to enable you to win. And so that reminds me of cards like Dragon's Rage Channeler. In Modern, we talked about something like that, where it's the reason it's so good is because it's helping you enact your strategy. It's digging through the deck, and it can fly over things and take over the game. Even like you said, Dave, going back to the olden days when Tarmogoyf was the threat du jour, that was closing the game by itself after you were doing what you were doing with your strategy. And I think this is a 2022 version of a card, if you needed to be any more 2022 than DRC already was. And again, I don't think we're saying this is better than DRC. It's just another piece of these puzzles where it's like, hey, do you want to get a lot of value for a cheap spell that can also just take care of your opponent's life total over like 2 or 3 turns? Then here's your piece. And because the graveyard is such a valuable zone of the game of Magic, and because digging through your deck is always something that you want to be doing, it's just you're getting a lot for a little. And there's the floor is very high. I mean, the floor is 2 mana eats a removal spell. That's the case for a ton of different spells, right? There's no ETB here. But if you play this card in the type of decks that want it, and you maybe play it like a Seasoned Pyromancer, where it's like, I'm not going to just expose this to removal and move on. I guess depending on the rest of the texture of your hand. But it's going to do a lot the turn you play it if you're doing anything that you're supposed to be doing with this card.
New staple. New multi-format staple, I think, is what
Amazing.
it is, right? Like, I mean, I don't know for sure what deck it's going to turn out to be the best in or in for the longest or anything like that, but I just think it's a card that is good, and people are going to be using it for a while.
It's committing felonies.
Yeah.
Well,
take document destruction seriously.
It's an attorney, our first playable attorney.
Wasn't Anafenza the Foremost a barrister?
Anafenza the Foremost? Why?
That's just the card that popped into my head.
Wow.
So like a British defense lawyer.
Yeah, she had the funny wig.
She didn't have a wig. She had a chariot and like
Dave,
goats.
What's the rule? What's the rule of podcasting?
Yes, and all right, that wraps up this week's hilarious show. Thanks, guys, for the good discussion on our new friend, the Bird Lawyer. And listen, if you out there want to check out a career in law, you got to take the LSATs, but look into law school. There's a lot of great law schools all over the world, and we believe in you. Also, if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. If you use Apple or Spotify, you can leave us a rating, and on Apple, a review. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us on Twitter at @thedivedown, all one word. You can also email at thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can find us on Patreon, patreon.com/thedivedown. You can support us while playing Magic, play some Ledger Shredders. This is probably a card that you want to buy on Moto, I feel like, because it's a rare. It's going to get expensive if it hasn't already. But until then, you can rent it. Mana Traders, if you use promo code TheDiveDown2022, you'll get 15% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. Also, as of this week, the latest monthly tournament series on Mana Traders is Pauper, which is cool because basically any tier of a Mana Trader subscription is good enough to rent Pauper decks. So participate in that for a little extra upside with your Mana Traders account. You can also support us with Barrister and Man. Get 15% off your first order from barristerandman.com. Get some sweet grooming or shaving or other fragrance and soapy products. Barrister and Man, you're going to like the way you smell. I guarantee it. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Space Flood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and caw-caw, caw-caw, caw-caw.